Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians, all are one. Today, we tackle an issue of sobering import, our female warriors. They are the women who have volunteered to serve in the military. Journalist and professor Helen Benedict of Columbia University has met and interviewed many of them for her forthcoming book, The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq. They are in many cases fighting two wars at once, in their units and those they were asked to fight. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
The Private War of Women in Iraq. What's the private war they're fighting?
It's against, alas, or in defense of themselves against their own comrades, because so many of them are attacked and harassed by their fellow soldiers, the very people who are supposed to be watching their back and sticking by them through thick and thin.
So we're talking about sexual harassment and actual rape, correct?
We are, yes. Sexual harassment, and I would like to define that, if I could, for a moment, because a lot of people think of it as harmless teasing. But what it is a relentless bullying, verbal bullying, of putting a person down because of being a woman usually, although it's also done to men sometimes. The underlying message of sexual harassment is, you're not one of us, you don't belong here, and we're going to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible 24/7. So that's the essence of what sexual harassment is. And then there's sexual assault attempt, which is everything short of rape, and then there's rape itself, and women soldiers have to deal with all of these problems.
So how big a problem is this, and is this an old problem or is this a new problem?
The statistics at the moment show that maybe about a third of women, slightly under a third, 30%, are raped or sexually harassed while they're in the military by other soldiers. And depending on the study, between 71% and 90% say that they're sexually harassed. In my own research, I would say that sexual harassment is almost universal. I would say 90% is a conservative figure.
Now, I suspect that, the sexual harassment, just as that is a part of being, in corporate, life, that has probably been going on in the military as long as you've had women in the military. The rape factor, is that something new, and is that...
None of it's new, to answer your question before. It has been going on from the beginning, but it's gotten worse, and there are a couple of reasons why, many reasons why, but the most important ones are that rape always goes up within the military during combat. It's always worse when soldiers are at war than when they're at home. And the other is that there are many more women serving now, especially in Iraq. We've never had so many women in an American war before in history. More women have died in Iraq and been wounded than in all the wars since Korea combined, including Afghanistan. So the more the women there are, the more this goes on, and the more that they're taking on the traditional male roles of being combat soldiers, which is happening a lot in Iraq too because of the nature of the war, which I believe makes many men feel threatened and even more resentful of women's presence.
You mean having women, what makes them more threatened? The fact
because
that
women are taking on the role of soldiers. They are shooting and being shot at, they are being gunners in tanks, they are playing the role of combat soldiers, which is officially and traditionally reserved for men, but not actually on the ground in Iraq.
That's interesting because, I know years ago Susan Brown-Miller, wrote about the whole thing about men, women, and rape, and how much rape is identified with war, and also how it is a way of putting women in their place. And that may tie in with what you're saying.
Yes, that's certainly an element of it. There's several elements, I think, that are going on in the military right now, some of which have been traditionally there all along and some of which are new. I mean, one is what you just said, that there's always, the military culture is a very misogynist culture and always has been. It's male-dominated. Obviously, it's a male world. And there's always been resentment of women. And the very fact that we have the Pentagon still banning them from combat while they're actually in combat, sends a message to soldiers that women aren't real soldiers. If they can't be in combat, what kind of soldier are you? Yeah, you don't belong here. You put us in danger. You're weaker than us. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Another is that now that we have a voluntary army, it may be that a lot of men who are particularly hostile towards women or contemptuous of them and who are prone towards being violent are attracted to volunteer for the military, because where else could you be more macho than in the military?
Right.
Another factor that contributes to that is that studies are showing that half of the men who join the military now were abused as children, and about 1/6 were sexually abused as children.
Really?
And research shows that abused children who are boys often turn into abusers as men. So that's another element. And the fourth element is that the nature of the war in Iraq, one of occupation, one with very questionable ideological reasons behind it, where we've got the message from the top, from the commander-in-chief down, that torture is all right. Conditions like that have been shown in past wars as well as in this war to further soldiers' tendency to commit atrocities, both towards civilians and, therefore, why not, towards their own people as well. So we've got a nasty mess adding to this. I do want to say one other thing. We're not talking about all men or all soldiers. I want to make that clear, because sometimes when this subject comes up, it sounds as if we're saying, every soldier is a terrible
raping,
misogynist.
pillaging, and plundering.
Exactly. And if it's happening to 1/3 of women, it means it's not happening to 2/3 of women. It's still a majority. And the men who are attacking them are in the minority, but they're a problem.
How many women do we have serving in war zones now, or in active duty?
It's about, since the Iraq War began, about 191,500 have served.
Is that the largest number ever?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I have read about women soldiers who have been raped while taking showers, who are afraid to go to the latrine for fear of being raped by their male colleagues, and so tend to hold it in, who walk around with knives with them to fend off possible attacks from rapists, again, their own military colleagues.
Yeah.
That's a pretty awful situation to be in.
Yes, well, these are all stories that the soldiers I've interviewed have told me directly. I've interviewed about 40 women who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of those 40, I would say maybe 5 said they felt completely fine while they were over there. The rest of them, for one thing, the minute they arrive in Kuwait, where they all go first before they're deployed to Iraq, they're told by their commanders never to go to the latrines or the showers, walk out alone at night without a battle buddy, another woman with them. The reality is that there often isn't another woman. Only 1 in 10 soldiers in Iraq is female, and very often the woman will be deployed in a platoon with only 2 other women, 1 other woman, or perhaps even all alone.
Right.
So I had one soldier tell me that she was assigned a man as her battle buddy to walk her home after her shift at night, to walk her home, meaning, back to her little trailer across the base in Iraq. And he said, "What would you do if I rape you right now?" And she said, and he was supposed to be protecting her, yeah. And she said, "Well, I've got a knife, so you watch it." And she didn't, in fact, have a knife. But after that, she did. She said, "After that, I carried one and I practiced whipping it out. And it was for the men on my own side, not for their so-called enemy."
Sort of makes the case for the chamber pot, doesn't it? Or,
Actually, what women soldiers do there is they use they drink water out of bottles, big litre bottles, 1.5 litre bottles, and they cut off the tops, and they learn to use those as a potty.
I would think so. And I've read at least one story about 3 women who allegedly died from dehydration because they had decided they were afraid to go to the latrine, so they just held it in. And
that's controversial. Yes,
that
that was Colonel Janice Karpinski told that story, and I've interviewed her, and she told me that she sat by the side of the doctor who diagnosed these deaths as dehydration. It's been hard to confirm. But
and
I will
happened
say,
in Iraq.
I will say that the heat there is so intense that if you stop drinking after about 2:30 at night, and I've had many women tell me directly that they would for this same reason, in order to avoid having to go out to the latrines at night because they're afraid of rape, you will get, especially if you do it day after day, you will get seriously dehydrated. I had one soldier tell me she did this regularly, and she had
stopped drinking.
Stopped drinking after 2:30 to avoid having to go to the toilets, and she had track marks all over her arms from IVs that she'd been given to rehydrate her because she passed out. And this was happening over and over again while she was in Iraq.
This sounds like something from another age. I mean, it sounds like something that Japanese soldiers might have done during World War I. Why does the U.S. military allow this to go on? And do they know what's going on? It seems that they do.
They certainly know, and they have, at least from the top down, there have been some attempts to do something about it. They've been reforming the laws. The laws are actually quite progressive at the moment. They've set up, the Defense Department has set up a website and an office to encourage and help people report, and they've set up a way of reporting anonymously. The problem is it's all very well at the top. You know, the rules can be great, but what happens on the ground depends on the soldiers who are on the ground and on their immediate commanders. And at the moment, most of the people, if you look at the statistics, most of the women who are raped are 21 and of the lowest ranks, and most of the assailants average age 28 and are of slightly higher ranks. So if the commanders are the ones that are actually doing the assaulting, of course they're going to turn a blind eye when people report it, or get the women into trouble who try to report it. Plus, the whole of military culture is that of camaraderie, which is so sad for women, but if you report another soldier for doing anything, you're considered a traitor, and you often are treated very badly as a result. You're ostracized by your comrades, you're punished, you're put in harm's way, because you're seen as, if you're a soldier, you should be able to look after yourself, and how dare you turn one of our own in? How dare you bring down the morale? And that's all still much more important to the military, really, than sorting this problem out.
Even if you're turning them in for rape?
Yes.
Wow. We have to take a break, but we'll be back right after the following message.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Columbia University journalism professor Helen Benedict. She's the author of the forthcoming The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq. Now, you talked about the measures that the Department of Defense initiated in 2005. I mean, they set up this new agency, the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, to oversee its response to sexual assaults in the military. And this was after, I guess the story started breaking about things like tailhook and sexual abuse at the military academies back in the early 2000s. Has SAPRO had any impact, do you feel, on responding to the problem of sexual abuse and rape in the military? Have more people come forward? Have there been more prosecutions?
That is extremely hard to measure. The Defense Department says yes, and here's our proof. The numbers of reported rapes, of reports, shot up in 2005, 2006. The trouble is, you never know if that means that people are reporting more or if there are more rapes. And then when the numbers started, they went down again for a year, only a tiny bit. suddenly the Defense Department isn't saying anymore that this is proof that we're working. You know, they were quiet when they go back down. It doesn't really prove anything. I would say that it's helped some women come forward, yes. But the truth of the matter is there's really no such thing as anonymous reporting of a rape in a military platoon. They're small enclosed societies. You're living together 24 hours a day. Everybody knows everybody's business. It's like living in a dorm, you know, all the time. And you're going to know the assailant. The assailant's going to know you. Other people probably will know about it. And it's going to come out very fast if you try and report. And then, as I said earlier, the result for the woman reporting can be horrible treatment by her colleagues. I have also been told, and I don't want to completely dismiss the Defense Department's efforts. I know that there are well-meaning people who've tried, and I know that there are also well-meaning commanders and so on who have made a difference and have helped certain cases get reported and followed up. But that said, I've heard so many stories from soldiers who've been quietened, silenced, if you like, by their commanders with counter threats. In other words, I'll tell you a story, if I may, of a woman who was on guard duty in Afghanistan at night. She needed a smoke. She put down her gun, which she shouldn't have done, her rifle. She put down her radio. She walked 20 feet away to smoke. A man came out of the darkness in American Armed Services uniform, put her in a chokehold and dragged her off and raped her. She went back to her post, stayed there, didn't take a shower, followed, she said, I'd been watching Law and Order, I knew what to do, followed all the procedures, reported the rape, got the medical kit, went to her commander, who said to her, fine, we will press charges, but we are also going to charge you with dereliction of duty for abandoning your post and your weapon for those few seconds. And if dereliction of duty is extremely serious, trial by court-martial, dismissal, your end of your career, maybe prison time. So they shut her up that way. This kind of thing happens a lot. I've had many, many cases of this.
So, I mean, do you and I know that this is going on? There have been articles about it. Do the women who are volunteering for the military know? I mean, it seems that women just sort of have to accept rape as a fact of life in the military. That is just a fact of life in the military. Oh, you're probably going to get raped. And I think I've heard stories, you know, where women soldiers say, you're probably going to get raped. Do women who are thinking about volunteering for the military know about this? Does Congress know about this? And is this having any impact on women's willingness to volunteer?
I think there's a complicated answer to that. I think some people know and a lot of people don't know, partly because maybe they don't hear about it, but because of denial. I mean, in civilian life, every woman knows that fear too. It doesn't stop us from going shopping, going jogging. I mean, it shouldn't. So I'm sure that most women tell themselves that happens to women who ask for it, or aren't careful enough, or aren't tough enough, or who flirt too much, or give the wrong signals. I won't be like that, so I'll be okay. In fact, when I give lectures on this subject, if there are military women in the audience, they tend to divide into two camps. There's a camp that says, thank you for telling this is the truth, I know it from my experience. And there's the camp that says, this is all exaggerated, it's not true, you're lying, I don't know anybody who's ever been raped, my colleagues are great, and they're more defensive than the men are. And I understand it. I mean, who wants to hear how dangerous your chosen career is? And we all seek ways of keeping, mythologizing to keep ourselves safe. So I think that's the actual reaction. And I don't know of any evidence of it diminishing recruitment by women. Although recruitment's a problem all around ever since the beginning of the Iraq War. It's been going down. Tell me what impressed you most about what you heard from the women that you interviewed for your book. I think the thing that I found the most heartbreaking is they joined because they wanted to be noble. A lot of them joined the National Guard, a lot of them joined before 9/11. There were those who joined after 9/11 for patriotic reasons. There were those who just wanted to give back to their country or maybe help rebuild Iraq. Or they had very idealistic ideas of doing good. And they were looking forward to this band of brothers, to quote Shakespeare.
Right.
You know, they were looking forward to the camaraderie and the family and all this stuff that's pushed on you about what it's like to be in the military. And instead, they're betrayed by the very people who are supposed to be looking after them, mutually, who are supposed to be their comrades, their brothers.
And their superiors as well.
And their superiors. And that is unbelievably heartbreaking.
Did any of them say they wish they had never volunteered?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Oh, yes. Yes, many. And not just because of the sexual assault, but also because of what they saw in Iraq and how they felt about the war and what they were actually doing there when they got on the ground.
For years, women have demanded to be treated as equals to men in the military. And as you pointed out, now they are serving, I mean, officially they don't serve in combat, but essentially they do, because they're in combat zones and they're, you know, holding guns and they're getting killed. Do you think women are ever going to be treated as equals to men in the military?
I think it'll take a very long time, but it might happen. I mean, every time women have tried to enter a male domain, they've been initially met by hostility, trying to get the vote, becoming politicians, becoming teachers, becoming doctors, becoming firefighters, and especially really macho domains like the police and firefighters. They've been harassed like this. Think of that movie about the mining, you know, what was it called? Anyway, where the woman was so harassed when she became a miner because women weren't. It's a similar thing.
Right.
And the answer's never been to give up and go home. The answer has just been to keep struggling until finally you get recognition. At the end of my book, I have a whole chapter of recommendations for how to start changing the military culture so that it does treat women equally and more fairly and with respect, which is the key to it all. Respect is the biggest weapon, for example, against rape. And more promotions and more recognition of what women do is one of my recommendations.
And what are some of the others?
I don't think women should be made to serve alone in platoons. They need to. The military needs to revamp the way it distributes women at the moment. It's much too dangerous to put women alone. And it's not equal treatment to men. Men never have to face a circumstance like that. Do you have some
that are virtually alone?
Yes.
The only woman in a platoon?
I spoke to one who's alone with 60 men.
Wow.
Yeah.
Had she been raped or?
She was harassed and assaulted repeatedly and endlessly to attempted rapes over and over again. She got herself transferred to another unit to try and escape. It just started happening all over again. And when she was so distraught and destroyed by this that she tried to kill herself when she came home.
Wow.
Yeah. And another sweet, idealistic young woman, very religious, who went because she thought she was doing the right thing. Yeah. So
they should not be placed alone in a platoon. Other things that you would recommend?
More promotions, as I said. I think the current military policy of waiving criminal records for the men they take in needs to be stopped immediately, because they are letting in men with records of domestic violence and even in some cases now sexual violence. So what do they expect?
Right.
And that was never allowed before. This has all been done under, because of this war and our shortages. That's another thing that has to end. I think we need, along with the medics that are already deployed with the army, we need to have female doctors and gynecologists and sexual assault counselors, along with the trauma counselors that are already there. The medical system is not set up for women at all. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are some of my recommendations.
Is this something, has Congress looked into this? I mean, that there's this big problem with, I think there were congressional hearings on tailhook, those kinds of scandals. Has Congress looked into this?
There have been some members, some representatives who have tried to pass new bills to improve the situation for women on all fronts. They've been regularly defeated, but I know that there are still Representative Louise Slaughter and Sanchez from California and Jane Harmon from New York and Patrick Kennedy, too, Rhode Island, is very concerned. He's more concerned with the veteran side of it, but paying attention to women. So I know that there are individuals in Congress who are paying attention to this. Yes.
Has this problem had an impact on recruitment of women into the military?
Well, as I said, I don't know any statistics about it. I mean, all recruitment's plummeted for all along, ever since 9/11.
Right.
Especially of African Americans, actually. They 58% drop in recruitment since the war began, hugely more than any other group. But the reasons are mostly opposition to the war, and as well as distrust of the Bush administration. I've never seen any studies that have broken down whether it's specifically women are not joining up as often because of fear of this. But I think that's partly because nobody's been asking the right questions in these surveys yet.
We're almost out of time, but I know one thing you have also said is that there needs to be more attention to the emotional needs of women who have suffered from what people are now calling military sexual trauma. You know, it's not just post-traumatic, stress syndrome. It's, we have this whole new thing.
Yes, and what's happening to women in Iraq and Afghanistan is they're getting both combat trauma and sexual assault trauma combined, and nobody's very well equipped to deal with that. There are efforts being made, but it's slow.
Well, I'm sorry, but we're out of time. Really interesting, and compelling subject, and I look forward to reading your book when it comes out. In the spring of next year?
Spring of next year from Beacon Press.
All right.
Thank you.
My thanks to Professor Helen Benedict for joining us. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.